Are you currently teaching teenagers and finding it hard to get them to engage with lessons? Do you feel that no matter what you do, your teenage students still roll their eyes every now and then? I'm Rubens Heredia, one of your Pavilion ELT vloggers. In this series of videos, we're looking at different ways in which we can make our lessons more engaging, effective and fun. And in this video, I want to share with you some things you should take into consideration when planning and teaching lessons to teenagers. Do you want to know what? So come with me. I don't know about you, but my teenage years were quite eventful. I can only imagine how overwhelming being a teenager can be in our current times. Gen Alpha, the generation born after 2010, it's getting in its teenage years now, and it's the most diverse generation to date in terms of ethnic background and family structure. They also have spent their entire life in a digital world. Most of us share the impression that in the world of smartphones, social media, infinite scrolling and instant gratification, our attention span is suffering. Films seem too long, concentration seems harder, and we all seem to be unable to spend more than 5 minutes on only one task. Well, the same thing is likely to our teenagers, or even worse. So let's cut to the chase. Tip number 1, understand what they are going through. Times may be different, but teenagers nowadays are still teenagers and share some of the characteristics and challenges of teenagers from previous generations. Here are some reminders of the changes that we go through in our teenage years, given by H.D. Brown over 2 decades ago, that still ring true. Some sophisticated intellectual processing is increasingly possible. Complex problems can be solved with logical thinking. Attention spans are lengthening as a result of intellectual maturation. Varieties of sensory input are still important, but increasing capacities for abstraction lessen the essential nature of appealing to all 5 senses. Factors surrounding ego, self-image, and self-esteem are at their pinnacle. Teens are ultra-sensitive to how others perceive their changing physical and emotional selves. Secondary schools are, of course, becoming increasingly adult-like. Although we're usually able to have some insight into what's going on inside students' brains, it's very difficult for us to know what makes each group of teenagers tick. As adults, the moment that we discover what's trending or cool, it's already old news and cringe to our teenage learners. That's why it is so important that we listen attentively to them. The more we show genuine interest in their lives and the things that they find interesting, the more likely they are to open up to us and provide us with essential information to better understand what they're going through and what they want to talk about. Tip number 2, create a safe environment for teenagers. Many of us went to school in very different times that included very different teacher-students dynamics. Some teachers made a point of trying to include all students in the classroom activities and promoting collaboration and cooperation among students. Others, however, made it clear that the role of the student was to simply listen and learn. When prompted, students should be able to provide the correct answer, and mistakes were seen as something to be ashamed of. Personally, my fondest memories do not involve the latter, and what I quote-unquote learned from them did not really stick. Research shows that being in a positive environment helps learning. According to Anne Hasper, if learners are feeling unsafe with their teachers or peers, maybe due to certain attitudes or comments when mistakes are made or previous learning experiences, the brain interprets the situation as a threat. We feel fear. This can either lead to a freeze response or an attempt to avoid the situation. Fear can stop learners from actively participating, or even worse, from simply trying. This has important implications to the way in which we correct and deal with mistakes in the classroom. Exposing students' mistakes to others or creating situations in which students feel exposed in front of their peers might trigger that flight or fight response and lead to demotivation and ultimately less effective learning. Creating a positive environment where students feel accepted and safe to make mistakes, on the other hand, can lead to more learning and better memories. Tip number 3. Don't restrict yourself with a rigid method. Walk into any teacher's room and I'm sure you find someone convinced that students are not able to concentrate for as long as they did before. They are even unable to focus enough to do that activity that worked so well 10 years ago. Newsflash: people change, and activities should change as well. Although it might be argued that our brains haven't changed that much in recent years, our social dynamics certainly have. In the more liquid and dynamic society we are living in, many of the rigid teaching methods developed in the past seem a bit outdated. Textbooks and materials associated with them might also look and feel a bit dated. That doesn't mean that we should write them off altogether, though. There are lessons learned and interesting techniques from such methods that can be useful for us, modern English teachers, to have in our repertoire. Welcome to the post-method era. According to Michel Locrisiano, the teacher can use one approach or another, taking from them what they believe to be important for the class. The teacher, together with the student, can provide an environment where the foreign language serves as an instrument to promote communication. In other words, the teacher must act as an agent that assists in the transformation of the student. Creating an environment in which students feel free to come up with learning objectives, suggest different topics and ways of doing the activities can certainly help you collect the information you need to make lessons more meaningful and fun to the specific group of teenagers you have in front of you. Tip number 4. Use flipped learning activities. Teenage students usually have homework from school. They also are still used to having parents or teachers checking on whether they did the homework or not. This gives you the perfect opportunity to use principles and techniques of flipped learning to maximize the time students have in the classroom for practice. The idea is to assign homework that will prepare students for the following lesson, such as some grammar or vocabulary explanations, reading texts, etc. Then, classroom time can be used for dealing with students' doubts and actually using the language items they have studied. Laura Nana wrote an interesting account on English Teaching Professional about a project involved flipped learning with her students in Lucca, Italy. According to her, the idea of giving the video for homework instead of having the students watch it in class or giving a traditional presentation myself enabled the students to work actively and independently from the beginning. After the students had watched the video for homework, I could devote the following lesson to discussion, interaction, and cooperative learning, using that precious time efficiently to listen to my students and to assist them in the personal discovery of knowledge instead of simply presenting content. Don't feel like you have to design all of the materials for flipped learning yourself, though. There are lots of ready-made materials online that are very helpful to students and can be easily shared with them. You can check more tips on using flipped learning in a previous video I made for Pavilion ELT in our YouTube channel. Tip number 5. Don't get too attached to your lesson plan. I don't know about you, but many of my lessons do not really go 100% according to plan. And there are different factors that are responsible for the actual lesson being sometimes quite different from what I originally had in mind. When teaching teenagers, this gap can be even bigger. But that isn't necessarily a bad thing, is it? According to Lorian Bonnet, magical things happen in the classroom, things you cannot predict. And isn't it fun to let your plan go for 5 silly little minutes rather than ignore everything happening around you and blindly follow a lesson plan you wrote 2 days ago in a completely different physical and mental place? Isn't language meant to be used to interact with your environment, internal or external, here and now? Teenagers do not always engage promptly with our lessons, but once they do, they often get really into it, and that kind of engagement and motivation is precious. Of course, we do have certain obligations and a curriculum to cover, but some flexibility and more attention to students' own ideas and needs can definitely make lessons more memorable, effective, and fun. I hope these ideas help you rethink a little bit the way you teach teenagers and help you design more helpful, meaningful, and fun lessons for your students. But I'd like to know, what strategies do you use to teach teens? Is there any tip you would like to share? Let us know in the comments below. And you can also contact me on all social media at whatisELT. Keep learning and keep teaching.